Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Megan Abbott, an Edgar-winning novelist whose books include You Will Know Me, Dare Me, The End of Everything, Bury Me Deep, and The Fever. She's also a staff writer on David Simon's HBO series The Deuce, and her latest novel, Give Me Your Hand, is available today in print and online from Little Brown & Company. Megan picked Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder's 1944 film noir starring Fred MacMurray as Los Angeles insurance salesman Walter Neff, who's drawn into a web of conspiracy and murder by Barbara Stanwyck's scheming housewife Phyllis Dietrichson. It's a defining work of the genre, a perfect engine of suspicion and betrayal fueled by snappy performances, sharply drawn atmosphere, and Wilder's perfect feel for structure and dark comedy. Also, Edward G. Robinson. Have you seen Double Indemnity? You should see Double Indemnity. Then you should listen to this episode. This is Someone Else's Movie.
To me, it is the perfect movie in every way. It has it all. I love Billy Wilder. It's probably my favorite, most consistent director. Mm-hmm. It's made more of my favorite films than any other director. And this one I saw, I think I was probably 10 the first time I saw it. I was a big fan of old movies as a very, very young child. I'd probably seen some like It Hot, and then I wanted to see... I think my parents probably, I'm sure I didn't know who directors really were at that time, but I think they pointed me towards this one, and it felt so glamorous to me. And, I didn't know what genre was. I just knew that it was, thrilling and strange, and Barbara Stanwyck with her blonde hair, and all of it was just, I just ate it up. And then having watched it maybe 25 times over the years, each time it's like a different experience for me.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing that of course you said it's a perfect, because it is, but it's amazing how many perfect films Wilder is associated with, and in different genres. I am amazed every time to realize, oh, that's right, he also made The Apartment, and Some Like It Hot, and Witness for the Prosecution.
And Sunset Boulevard.
Which is sort of the bridge between this film and all the other ones.
Right, yes.
And he is so, his facility with not genre, but cinema is... so striking, and he's made films that 70 years later don't feel creaky. They haven't aged. The mechanics, the mechanisms, the dialogue. This should be everyone's introduction to film noir, because it's the best, it's the most idealized version of it, in that everyone always has exactly the right thing to say, and the lighting is always just perfect, and we get to be as smart as the plot, which isn't always the case in noir. So many plots are designed to trap us out and make us work, or, in the case of something like The Big Sleep, it doesn't really matter why things happen.
Yes, we're mystified the whole time, and we sort of surrender to it. But I think that's exactly right, because I know I often will get arguments that the sort of quintessential film noir is out of the past, which is a movie I like a lot, but I think it's very overrated among noir enthusiasts, because I think it's very romanticized, and it's a little too long, and it's a little creaky, and it doesn't really, has a wonderful femme fatale, but she's not really a full character. And I think Billy Wilder, starting as a writer, I think you just see the story, the dialogue, the characters are so well etched in this. There's not a moment of extra anything, and I think that's where you see the difference between a very good movie and a very great movie.
Yeah. And Wilder's, his whole history, the Eastern European exile kind of thing, I get a vibe from his work that I got from my grandparents, who were from the Ukraine and Poland and Russia, and it's impatience. What? Come on. That's the classic Eastern European Jewish experience is, what? Come on, what are you waiting for? Let's go. I'm hungry.
Yes.
And this is, it doesn't rush you to the ending, but it does start from, it starts at the end, it gets you right into it. It has a sort of restlessness, which to me reveals itself as if you want to go to that level of textuality, I'm convinced that on some level Neff is mad at himself for not figuring it out while he's telling the story, and we get that. We're getting his anima, we're getting his spirit infused into the story of a kind of a dope who got suckered and now regrets it, and the film is sort of chiding him retroactively as we're watching it happen.
Yeah, the film is smarter than he is, and and
Exactly.
you feel it from the start because he's already in this position of weakness in the start because of the narration, how it begins at the end, so to speak. But I think it's really true, and it's a really difference between that and the book, and the choice that Wilder and Raymond Chandler must have made together because the book he's Walter Huff in the book, and he really has a sort of nihilism in him. He wants to go to the dark center of things, and that wouldn't work in the movie, and it's not Wilder's thing anyway. I mean, I think you're really right, that Eastern European element, that sophistication, the sort of world weariness, and he's not surprised by anything, and you feel that smartness in the movie, and it's really not going to be bothered with existential angst. It's just there's just a sort of zest for the sort of foolishness of man, and Walter is definitely the foolish man.
Yeah, even changing the name from Huff, which sounds sort of proud and spiteful, Huffy, and to Neff, which is kind of a nebbishy sort of sound.
Yeah.
And they wanted it to be something else, right? They wanted it to be Ness, according to this little booklet.
Okay, yeah, I've not heard that, but I always
found an actual Walter Ness and had to change the name because they were afraid to get sued.
Yes, and if he were a salesman, he would definitely sue. He would lose all his business. And they changed Phyllis's last name too.
That's right.
In the book, it's Nerdlinger, which is not very cinematic, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think giving her Dietrichson feels much more. I don't know. It's a little more glam. I mean, I think the movie frames her as much smarter, obviously, and I think her name reflects, the sharpness to it.
Yeah, and certainly Stanwyck is playing just. She's more impatient than the film. She's just, I always thought that Kathleen Turner in Body Heat was doing such a deliberate weariness in her voice. It's just, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Let's just do it. I know what I have to do 3 steps ahead of you. Why am I even here?
Yes.
But Stanwyck is the cat, and she's playing with him like a mouse, and she's got this zing in her dialogue, and her physicality is just so interesting. And that wig, which apparently everyone hated,
right?
It works. Just like it's the half-hearted effort of trying. This will work. He's an idiot. I can pull this off.
Yeah, I remember reading. I think it's in that Billy Wilder's Conversations with Cameron Crowe, right? That he talks about how he convinced Stanwyck that the wig would be great, and then a few weeks in, he realized, nope, she was right. She looks like George Washington. But I remember watching it. When you're a kid, you don't think about that. You think this is how everybody looked back then, and so that it didn't bother me. But later, it seemed to be so smart because it's sort of also part of the general trashiness of Phyllis, which I think Wilder really played up with the anklet and and it's part of the book too, with like the perfume that smells like Mexico, like Ensenada, and there's just something about her that says new money, and class is sort of a big part, I think, of the book and the movie, and you can see. I remember reading that both Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray were very scared to take these parts, but they both just went for it. Yeah. Obviously, at some point, I think Wilder said to Stanwyck, "Are you an actress or not?" And that was like all she needed, Brooklyn girl. But you just sensed that zest and vigor, and they were just going to tear their teeth into it because there's no hesitation from either of them in these parts.
Yeah, and MacMurray, he never really did anything like this. Again, he played heavies and villains here and there, but this is the question that ever since you said you were 10, at what point, because I didn't the first time, at what point did you understand the role of sex in the film? Because it took me at least 2 viewings, and I would have been maybe 12 the first time I saw it, because we saw it in school.
Right, in school.
In a theater class, yeah.
Wow.
I suspect it had just come out on VHS, maybe, and it was one of the things they could get.
Right, yes, right.
But my media studies class, we saw that and Psycho. Those were the 2 films.
Oh my gosh.
12 or 13. It was
quite an introduction.
Maybe 13. And in neither case did I really appreciate them until the second time I came back to them. And I saw Psycho theatrically because I got lucky. Double Indemnity was another video viewing, but it's a very different film to a kid. I mean, that was definitely my experience of it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's hard to understand what one would have understood then. I certainly knew that there was something uncomfortable about it from the start. I mean, it begins in this uncomfortable place, and whenever I've taught it a few times, I always teach the scene when he first sees Phyllis and she's in the towel and she's behind the stair railing, and they sort of frame her erogenous zone, the sort of iron spokes of the rail, and like none of that you're gonna get when you're a kid, but you're getting it. You are getting it because of course it's all unconscious. No one's really getting it the first time they watch it. I think something in my sort of sense that this was adult was probably the closest I got. That this was adult stuff. I'm certainly I didn't understand the fade to black and then they come back and they've obviously had sex, and we don't like that kind of the film logic of the production code era. But I certainly knew there was something seamy going on. It wasn't really till much later that I realized how, having seen so many more movies, how they were playing it for sleaziness. It was there's nothing romantic about it, even from the start. There's no sense that this is love. It's
it's torrid.
It's torrid, and the repartee is their flirtatious repartee at the beginning with the, what's the speed limit in this state, kind of double entendre dialogue is. There's this sort of S&M quality, which, later I was sort of alarmed at, that Wilder got away with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you hear this about the code all the time, right? If you gave them what they wanted and you could say, look, there's none of this, there's none of this, there's none of this thing, he gets punished,
right.
There's morality operating, you could do anything else as long as you just didn't directly quote the stuff they didn't, or directly reference or display the thing they didn't want to see.
Yep.
And it just made movies better. I
really do kind of think that. I remember Martin Scorsese has this term for it, smuggling, and especially talking about B movies where they would really get away with stuff. But there's stuff being smuggled in these movies, and this is a perfect example of it because it's a really filthy. I mean, in every way, and the as is the book, of course. But you could get away with that in the book, and the book was quite scandalous. But in the movie, I mean. And the whole oddness of the scenario, really, because it's so immediate. It suggests that desire comes in an instant, and then you are a slave, and then it goes away in an instant. And the phrase in the book is that after the murder, that their love, curdled. I think curdled is such a great word.
Yeah, and you're left with nothing but regret.
Yes.
And guilt.
Yes.
And something else I didn't realize until just recently, actually, was that Chandler looked down on Kane to the point where he didn't even want to be associated with Wilder writing it. There was some weird referenced anger about the seediness of this project, and he just kept trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories on that, and I'm not sure quite where. I think that Wilder and Chandler were diametrically opposed to work together anyway. Chandler is sort of a very puritanical in many ways in his personal life, and Wilder was a bon vivant at that time in particular. But his views on Kane, there's some famous quotes, like derogatory quotes about Kane, but they've also in his letters and other things he's written, he's not really that derogatory. He really felt that the dialogue that works in the book works on a page. It's meant to be read. It's not meant to be spoken. I think he's really right about that when you look at it. Kane was really loved American slang and the kind of plain and sometimes awkward way that real people speak. And you can't do that in a movie, especially in a Hollywood movie. No. Yeah. And so I think that's something that Chandler knew, and I think people kind of push that because they I don't know. I'm a Chandler, devotee, so I'm always sort of defending him against his sourness, because I love Kane. But I think it's been a little oversold. But I don't think that the Wilder Chandler.
Okay.
I think the fact that they didn't get along at all was really maybe more the root of it. His annoyance of this. This guy who was sort of had all the women in Hollywood, and he was so smart and so witty, and and Chandler was such an unhappy man. But it clearly worked. I mean, the script is maybe one of the greatest scripts.
Yeah. It's like a rubber band. It just snaps. It's so taut and
pointy, and it smacks you.
It is, and there's so, I mean, that's another thing about smuggling or getting stuff in there. The homoeroticism really took me many times to understand, and that's not, I mean, that's definitely part of the book, but they really went for it, and I think it probably took, I was very much an adult by the time I saw that the Edward G. Robinson character and Fred MacMurray's character, that's really a bromance between the two of them, ultimately.
And he's jilted and betrayed, and ultimately that friendship ends in misery in the original. And of course, we were talking about the original ending earlier, that he watched him executed. He has to watch his best friend go to the gas chamber.
I mean, really, he's his femme fatale, but he, in more the Sam Spade vein, and is going to see the femme fatale go down for his crimes. So it's so fascinating, and it's just a sense of so perfect with noir, because Edward G. Robertson is the one who believes in the rules, and the rules exist for a reason, and everywhere around him, people are breaking them.
He's the only man with honor. He's like a knight.
Yes.
Who's just miserable all the time because he. It's I mean, it just came out, so I guess it's relevant. But the Branagh version of Poirot, where he has decided that Poirot's fatal flaw is that he sees the world as it should be, and that it causes him soul-crushing misery to have a fork out of place on a table, and it's just, dude, come on. That's OCD. This man is an emotional cripple, and he's suffering so badly. But I see that in Robinson's performance, because he just, those pauses he takes before he finally renders his judgments, and just the sagging that goes on over the entire film as he just gets smaller and smaller, like a potato, just pulling into himself because the world is disappointing him.
It is, and he, I mean, I think it's sort of, it's so quintessentially noir, because it's like the realization that we live in a fallen world, and he faces, it's sort of heartbreaking, and he all the time throughout it, he talks about the little man, right, which is his intuition or his sense as he knows when people are cheats or liars, and that is one of the phrases from a movie that I most use in my own life, because it so works. But like his keen sense of what is really sort of what we would consider female intuition is so strong, and I think it also gives more heart to the movie, because it would be very perhaps too cold a movie without him and without that performance, Yeah,
I mean, look at Body Heat for an example, which is essentially a remake, an uncredited and fairly clever remake, but without the heart, because Ted Danson's character doesn't interact with them as much. He's just on the outside, and Kasdan gave him his own shtick to do instead of actually care about the other characters. And you have, there's no heart to that film. He didn't want there to be.
Right.
And it's successful because of that, but it is only ever a pastiche.
Right.
Because this is the meat. Like, we see how this would really play with actual people involved instead of characters.
That's right. If everyone is like Walter and Phyllis, that's a very hyper stylized world. It's a world that's very interesting, but it's not exactly our world. And by having Edward G. Robinson's performance in there, it's not even just the part, but his performance is so engaging that it connects it to our world, which makes everything actually matter more, and it just gives weight and gravitas that would not be there otherwise, which I think with Body Heat is so enjoyable. It does not have gravitas,
Yeah, it sort of invites us to giggle at it.
Yes.
And this film just wants us to be sad and sorry for what's happening, because we are watching, it is the perfect crime until everybody gets killed. Yeah. Like, all perfect crimes are the perfect crime until everybody gets killed.
That's right.
But I do love that filtered through Wilder's perspective, where he might as well just sit down with you because of that opening shot. He's like, this isn't going to go well. Like, this just isn't going to... Just watch these idiots. They're going to... Just watch. And that the pleasure of that, of watching the perfect scheme just collapse under human fallibility, and the one thing that no one expected is always a human flaw. It's never that the safe doesn't open. It's what happens after they rob the safe. And this is just that perfect, eloquent setup and payoff of human frailty, and the fact that when you recruit someone who's not particularly bright, he's not going to be the best person.
No, it is very poorly planned and executed crime, which is one of the things I love about it. Is it's so much more realistic, and that's really what James M. Cain was always writing about, like people. I mean, my brother's a prosecutor, and he always says to me, criminals always, real life criminals get caught all the time because they make mistakes all the time. There is no perfect crime, and this one is filled with. I mean, the reason that it fails, of course, is they want to get the most money. So their greed ultimately dooms them. But I love how, there's so many ways that it's going to get screwed up, even beyond, there's like problem with it after problem. And I think I read this was true, and maybe you read it too, but that there's that moment when after the crime and the car doesn't start to get off the train tracks. And I read that was actually... it was not supposed to happen, and it could be apocryphal, but
it's in this thing.
It's in
Apparently Wilder's car didn't start on the way to the studio that day.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, what if?"
Yeah, which
and
I love.
Cheap. Again, all of his ideas are in the service of story, but something not happening, that costs nothing. You just shoot a car that doesn't move, and you have instant suspense.
That's right.
He's building a textbook for noir as he's making this film. And there were already other films. I mean, The Maltese Falcon had come out before, and I believe The Big Sleep had either been shot or was in production.
It was not out yet, because it had been delayed for various reasons.
Oh, that's right. They're like 18 months apart.
Yeah.
And what you get is a film that isn't worried about people following the rules or people understanding what it's doing, and it's just telling a story and perfecting the genre as it goes.
Yes.
And it's just, it's so pleasurable.
It absolutely is. And that car that's starting, it's a real Hitchcock move, but Hitchcock would have played it very differently. To Wilder, it reflects like how ridiculous life is. Life will always drop a wall safe on your head, and so and that's really something that's specific to Wilder, and that though in some of the other expat directors too. I do think you're really right about the Eastern European element, or something like Fritz Lang. I can see him, he's sort of a darker hue, but I can see him making use of something like that too. But I think that piece is that's what separates, I think, those film noir from ones directed by like Howard Hawks or Don Huston American directors, where there's they're not as dark, and they're not as cynical. They will be in the 50s, but it's still before the end of the war.
Yeah, they're
the bomb.
They're process guys now. They want to know how it works. They want to see the pieces of the watch ticking. And Wilder is unique in his understanding of the schlemiel, like the idea of the loser who thinks he's not a loser. You get it here, you get it in The Apartment. Mm-hmm. Maybe not so much in Some Like It Hot, but certainly Lemon is playing someone who knows, he's panicked all the time because he knows he can't do this.
Yes.
And Curtis just, I want to get laid. I want to stay alive and I want to get laid. I'm doing this.
Yes.
But there's a surprising dramatic heft to a man who doesn't understand his limitations and immediately supersedes them. And I think that's why I'm sure that's why Double Indemnity plays as a comedy, not just because the lines are funny, but because MacMurray is so completely out of his element. But it's that arrogance of the unqualified. People do this all the time, and I catch them, but I bet I can not get caught.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same. But that's the root of all crime, is I can get away with this.
It absolutely is, because this is not really ultimately about. It's not about romance, and it's barely about desire. Desire is very fleeting. It's very destructive, but it's very fleeting, and it's a little bit of a ruse, right? Because really, what he wants is to try to rig the system. He really, and he thinks he can because he thinks he's smart. There is a kind of, also, in some ways you could make the argument, this is very 2017 argument, but it's sort of like Wilder, which a lot of his movies, you can make this case, are about toxic masculinity at its peak, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's because he thinks he can get away with it that ultimately his own foolish, really lazy decisions are what gets him caught ultimately.
Yeah.
And his failure to do what Phyllis would do if the positions were reversed, which is to try to keep the new enemy close. You keep your comrade, your partner in crime close. You don't, you don't take a chance. He doesn't realize how smart Phyllis is.
Yeah. Why would he? She's a woman.
Yes,
he just
that's
doesn't
right.
see it that
That's
way.
right. Yes.
He's this kind of the smug, condescending know-it-all who does know everything about his one thing,
right,
and immediately ventures outside of it. Like the Venn diagram between what he's good at and what he's not good at.
Yes.
Those are not. There is no intersection. Those are headlights on the car that's speeding towards him.
Yes.
And it's and the 2017. I mean, I was. I'll probably cut this little next bit because it's just me crabbing about Trump, which seems to happen every month and every week.
I
But
think that all the time.
I take some pleasure in the fact that his arrogance at running for president, he never thought he was going to win, clearly, because his business enterprises can't withstand the
He
scrutiny.
didn't care. He never really thought about what it would mean to win either, so for that reason.
And the lack of foresight destroying his illusions of success is just delicious. It's the only pleasure I can take from this.
Yes.
And, hundreds of thousands of people are going to be
Right, it's a grim pleasure, but we'll take what we can get.
It's the one thing, watching his insecurities just destroy him. It's finally becoming Shakespearean.
Yes.
Except that he isn't destroyed yet. We should get to that.
Yes, but we're fathers and sons, and I feel like there's a lot of Shakespearean qualities to how I think it's going to go down. I would love to imagine what Billy Wilder would think of all of this.
Because this could, the level of the slow motion train wreck farce of it does very much feel like something he would know about. And
definitely.
Trump is MacMurray in The Apartment.
Yes.
That swaggering asshole.
That's right. That's the closest that really he gets again to playing a jerk. Is when Wilder knew that,
he saw it.
And those are the performances you remember MacMurray. Because he was very good at it, which I think often only really. I think there's something that. It's the same reason that Lemon works so well, Wilder, when better than he does with any other director. There's something that Wilder understood about these guys who maybe were somewhat simple, but they weren't. So they're not trying to do a lot of fancy tricks, but he's able to access something about them. He certainly is able to access something about Barbara Stanwyck that she's wonderful in everything. Let's be honest, but he gets something out of her here that I don't think I've ever seen any other actress in any other movie. She's terrifying.
I was
really.
going to say she's allowed to be scary in a way that maybe she wasn't by any other filmmaker.
Right.
And she responded to it. She's all in.
Yeah.
And it's a magnificent performance.
She's chilling. And she's just almost like an automaton. It's really fun. And that is part of, I think, the sort of, femme fatale, the term has been around forever, but the film noir version of it, I mean, she really does sort of set the template because she's not really a person. She's this projection of male anxiety, and she's just sort of the abyss, and, this emptiness in her.
Well, that's like, the smile never reaches her eyes, which is so creepy when you notice it. Because at first, she's real pretty, and you don't notice it.
Right.
And the film sort of tricks you that way.
She's sparkling, and,
and she's lit beautifully in the way. And it's, she looks great, and the film is using her that way because we're seeing Neff's version of her. But then, maybe, 4 scenes in, you start to realize just how cold she is in the face. And she does everything with her voice. She purrs, she seduces, she scowls, she does everything over the course of the movie, but it never makes it above her nose, and it's really disturbing once you figure it out.
Yes.
She's so good at that.
She is, and that's exactly right. That's exactly what, so that is what she does, and she also, I think that's why she's costumed in some way the way she is, because it's very frilly and feminine at the beginning. She's got this very fussy blouse. It's very girlish, and and obviously the anklet, and and the scene where I think the one you're talking about where she turns is she's wearing this fuzzy pink sweater. I see it as pink. It could be white. But it's a very pale fuzzy sweater. It looks Angora to me. It's Angora. It's so feminine and girl, almost teeny bopper-ish. So it's such this contrast, and then it gets harder and harder. She's wearing these suits, and and it gets
she starts to develop lines.
Yes,
like armor, like suits, literal suits of armor.
That's right, and she's wearing this sort of the Black Widow attire, and it's just so juicy, Wilder, you can just see him like giggling to himself as this is all going on.
I imagine it must have been a fun set, but there's just so much of a charge of excitement that it's at the edges of everything. It's in the score, it's in the lighting, just the sense that everyone is getting away with something, and then of course it all goes to hell because this is what happens. This is the film that teaches us that this is what happens.
Right, you go too far, and you want too much, and you're going to be punished for. I mean, it's actually perfect production code movie because know if you want these things you shouldn't want, you're going to pay for them, and I mean. That the movie sort of very cunningly says yes, absolutely. We can't agree more. I mean, it is interesting to think about the alternate ending, which I guess would have been in some ways. To me, this is such a better ending, even though I'm obviously very curious to see what was apparently the most expensive scene in the movie.
The whole set.
Right.
It was photographed from multiple angles. There were close-ups on the hands dropping acid and all of that.
Right, yes.
The script is reprinted in the Masters of Cinema booklet, and I love it because I'm going to just pull it out.
Yes.
There's this great line. Just retake it here. This is a great line of direction. Shot E9, the second Doctor, close shot. He stands to the right of the gas chamber door, taking notes on a pad. He glances toward First Doctor, out of scene, and looks through the Venetian blinds into the gas chamber. The acid man stands near him. The acid man is the man who mixes the acid, and that is all they ever call him. But that's Chandler to me. Like the procedural factors, the research that he's done, the sense that, well, there's an acid man.
Yep.
What do we call him? And he's the acid man. There's an absolute frankness to it. None of that would have made it onto the screen, but it would have.
Yeah.
In the regard for the characters and in the way that it was shot. And we'll never know how it plays, but I'm assuming it wasn't triumphant enough. In a weird way, the ending that they went with, the one in the film, feels triumphant because justice is served, and Edward G. Robinson gets to be sad but wistful. And you're right, it plays as a man remembering a beautiful romance that ended too soon.
That's right.
It's
that's
brief
right.
encounter of all things.
Yes, that's right. And it's warmer, and
yes.
and ultimately, in some ways, feels more Wilder to me. These endings aren't typically, nihilistic, or the book is even darker. This is a suicide pact over a cruise liner with sharks swimming in the water. It's the creepiest ending ever. It would have worked in a movie. Maybe a super gothic movie. Maybe like a Mario Bava had done it. That would have been the ending. But I think in some ways it makes more sense. It feels more Wilder to me. I think Robinson is really. He doesn't share, Wilder, I think, doesn't share his morality, but in some ways, maybe he does. Maybe it's less more it's not necessarily morality, but it's comradeship and, and I don't know. I feel like Wilder feels a closeness to that character, even as I think he probably finds him somewhat prissy. So it's interesting to think of the two in relation to Sunset Boulevard. In some ways, very similar endings, but Wilder is much more generous with Norma Desmond than he is with, as he should be, than with Phyllis. But I think he doesn't like to. He takes what should on page be a very dark ending, but he gives it a little spin, a little.
It's got a kick.
Yeah, kick is a good way to put it. Yeah.
It's one of the few Wilder films that doesn't have a perfect ending. In terms of its line, it doesn't have that perfect button of dialogue that, shut up and deal, nobody's perfect, dive right for my close-up. Yeah. It's just, damn it, this could have gone better. And you're just left alone with it for a while, which is so perfectly... it's the ending of The Maltese Falcon, right?
Right.
He sends her up the river and
it's very similar,
I'll be here waiting, but there's nothing to wait for here. It's just this sort of ennui that lasts after the case is closed.
Yes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at the ending credits, you see the silhouette of the man, him on the crutches, right? I believe. I think that's the last shot, technically, and it's so perfect in terms of noir and sort of the gender dynamics, because the sense that man is ultimately impotent, that women hold all the power, and that men are sort of slaves to desire or to loyalty or to really all these human emotions is sort of wonderful. And I think that might be the closest there is to a joke at the end or a wink, because I think to Wilder that's kind of funny, because if these men would just like get it together and stop taking sex so seriously, they would probably be better off.
Yeah, that was Cain's thing though, the crime of passion, right?
Yes.
Everything was about spiraling out of control.
That's
and
right.
Maybe that's why it's such an odd ending for Wilder, because he couldn't fully reconcile the demands of the material with his own impulses or his own sort of puzzled, questioning understanding of humanity.
Yes, and I guess I hadn't even thought of this till now, but I wonder if the ending is partially a little bit Chandler's doing, because it's a very Chandler ending, as if because Edward G. Robertson's character is a little like Philip Marlowe, Chandler's detective, world-weary and beaten down, and his heart was usually broken in one way or another, usually by man in the books, most famously at least by men, and so I wonder if that was some way he had a hand in there when they were trying to sort of figure out why this one ending wasn't working and this one was, that we should give the ending really to Keyes, to Robinson's character, really, that it feels like it could be Chandler's hand in there at the end a little bit.
Yeah, they needed all three of them together to somehow figure out the right ending for cinema.
Right, that's right.
Which is always great.
Yes.
It's a collaborative art. Those people are right.
And really, I think Wilder's one of the few directors that you can consistently say gets the voiceover right. People always say you should never use voiceover, of course, but they're never thinking of a movie like this or Sunset Boulevard or one of the, a well-used voiceover. And this one has it. It has... We need to be in Walter's head, and that's the way we do it. Is he's framing the story, even when you really shouldn't be able to be, technically, since he
doesn't get woozier as it goes.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Someone will do that someday, and it won't work, which is why it works here.
Right. That's right.
So we. This is the question I've been hoping and waiting to ask of you all along. Is like, has the film influenced you in your work? Is there some part of Double Indemnity that's worked its way into your own creative DNA?
Yes, I would say, this is one of the top 3 or 4 books that have had the biggest influence on me. I mean, King generally, because of the sort of tabloid quality, and this is really a tabloid movie, but I think also Stanwyck, has always loomed really large for me as a powerful female character who dominates the action and drives it. And I've written a few characters that really are ripped almost full cloth from her performance here. It probably giving them, written more from a woman writing that kind of character, which changes it a bit, but but I have a character in one of my books, Queen Pin, who's sort of really taken from this and from Angelica Houston's character in The Grifters, which is, I think, draws a lot on this character. So really these sort of icy women who are icy in some ways because they had to be. You sense that you never find out what led to them to becoming this calculating and this cold and this sort of heartless. And in my books, I often try to get into that more, but not always. I mean, I think there's a power in not knowing, and I don't like to always take away their power. So that certainly is a big factor. And I think the Keyes, Edward G. Robinson's character is always a little bit in a lot of the bureaucratic men I've written, because I find him very sweet, and even in his prissiness, or his sort of, I don't know, his heartbreak I find rather moving. So I think it's definitely found its way into it. And I think in the general aesthetic of the movie, which is that it's set in apartments and offices and cars, it's the real world. There's such dark glamour in it, the way it should be, somehow.
That's right. We didn't even talk about the department store, which is just such a magnificently dull set.
Yes,
and
so generic,
And in a weird way, this great window into war-era America where you never see that. You never see staples arranged on shelves. It was always a folksy corner store, or it was some, country gas station with a larder in the back. This was one of the few times I was really made aware of what shopping was and how dull it all looked. And I mean, that's intentional. It's part of the production design. But it doesn't... Yeah, it's this great suggestion that if all they want is money, this is all that it will buy them. And that there's no point to any of this. It's just one little moment where... Oh yeah, you get to buy more cans.
Yeah.
That's really all you get.
And that feels so wild to me because it's sort of putting the anklet on her and that she has this perfume, that she there's a cheapness to this desire, that this sort of striving, which is so California and LA about it too, which is why to me it could only be set there because it's sort of the terminus of the American dream when things it's down to its tackiest, and that grocery store feels so... It's just so emptied of history or meaning, which I think is, one of the sort of ways we look at Los Angeles, at least as an icon, and I think that's part of it too. There's something so tacky about it all, which I love, which is fabulous. And I think that goes across the whole movie. This is not the glamorous nightclubs that we see in other noir. It's not the sort of beautifully lit city streets, and we do get Venetian blinds, though, if I recall, but really early version of it, template Venetian blinds.
The seeds are everywhere.
Yes.
So, any recommendations for subsequent noir? If this is the first time someone is encountering Double Indemnity, where would you point them next?
Well, I would definitely say, I would definitely consider Sunset Boulevard another film noir, and that's sort of one that people disagree about. Casting at that, but to me it's absolutely so. And then I always make a pitch for my favorite film noir, which is In a Lonely Place, which Humphrey Bogart, Gloria Graham, a wonderful book and a wonderful movie, and definitely very different. So I think, but I think both sort of so stunning and great. So there is some humor in A Lonely Place, but it's a much more darkly romantic and very nihilistic noir.
And Bogart's best performance, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a soul sickness there that he just never had.
That's right. And I think, that might be the connection between the two of them. It's really actors going for it and going against their type. Because as much as Bogart often played bad guys before he really became the Bogart became famous for, but then we were used to him playing, Rick or, this sort of from Casablanca or Sam Spade, where there was, he was the hero in some ways, a complicated hero, but a hero. And in this one, he is not at all. So that would be another one that I would heartily recommend.
Oh, that's great. Those are terrific. That's a great place to start. It's like the building blocks of a fascination with the form.
Yeah, what would you have for one that you would recommend of people who hadn't seen it? Their sort of canon of noir.
You know what? I would go directly to Wilder again, and I'd go with Lost Weekend.
Oh, that's great! Yeah,
technically not a noir, but it really is.
It is. Yeah,
yeah. Just
I agree.
Again, it's about the descent. It's about someone. It's about, to me, for my great attraction to film noir is that it is. Always a story about someone you ought to like and can't. You're pushed away by their decisions or their corruptibility, or you watch them be corrupted. And The Lost Weekend has a man destroying himself voluntarily. I mean, there's never any reason for it other than, this is all right, I'll do this. And it just spirals so brutally. And supposedly, one of the writers in the Masters of Cinema booklet seems to suggest that it was Wilder's dissatisfaction with Chandler's alcoholism that led him to make it right after.
Yes, I've heard that too, and that makes sense to me. I mean, there's something, he really sinks his teeth into it, Wilder, in that movie, and I think ultimately noir is not really about genre, or I'm not the person who said this. I think Paul Schrader initially said this, but it's about mood, and that is, if that's the standard, and to me it is. That is a true noir tale, and it's like it's a one-way ticket. And as you say, it's an everyman person, and I think that's also what makes it so relentless and so hypnotic, because we could be that guy.
Yeah, that's the allure of noir, right? You can turn it. You can walk away.
Yeah.
We get to know what the right choice is.
Right.
Them, not so much.
Yes, exactly.
My thanks to Megan Abbott, whose new novel Give Me Your Hand is available in stores and online today from Little Brown & Company. She's also writing on the HBO series The Deuce, which returns for a second season in September. Thanks also to Natalie Atkinson. She knows what she did. You can follow Megan on Twitter at Megan Abbott, all one word, and you can find Double Indemnity on Blu-ray and DVD from Universal Studios Home Entertainment. If you're in the UK, you're definitely going to want to pick up that Masters of Cinema Blu-ray edition, which is the one we were playing with. It's also available on iTunes. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you've been listening to the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.